will deal with these budget issues. We don't want to distract from this signature health care law of the President of the United States.
This is Vicki from Oregon.
And you can see all of that conversation in our video library at cspan.org. The U.S. House is gaveling in for legislative work. 10 bills on the agenda, a number of them dealing with federal land issues. Also a bill that reauthorizes for 10 years, a bill that requires guns to be manufactured with metal components, ensuring that they can be detected by screeners, X-ray machines, and security devices. Live coverage now of the U.S. House here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. As we face a new day, help us to discover the power of resting in you and receiving assurance and encouragement in your amazing grace. Send your Spirit down upon the members of the people's house. May they be reminded always of who they are. Grant them wisdom, insight, and vision that the work they do will be for the betterment of our nation during a time of struggle for so many Americans. May they earn the trust and respect of those they represent, whether or not they had earned their vote, and make history that expands the great legacy of so many who have served in this chamber before now, a legacy of noble service, sometimes political risk, but always great leadership. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from California, Ms. Hahn.
Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I was saddened and angered by a recent email I received from a distraught constituent. Julia from Gurnee, Illinois, told me she is now one of the millions whose health insurance will be canceled because of Obamacare. Buying a comparable plan means her out-of-pocket expenses will jump more than $5,200 a year. Worse, the smaller network excludes her current doctor, the doctor that she's seen for 33 years. Only doubling her premiums would allow her to keep the doctor who has known and cared for her for most of her adult life. The President promised middle-class families would pay $2,500 less in annual health care costs under Obamacare. He promised they would be able to keep their insurance plans and their doctors. Julia's story proves again how empty those promises were. The Senate and the President must act, as the House has, to allow all Americans to keep their doctors. Americans can't afford more broken promises. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the chamber for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker,
I rise today to congratulate Proyecto Emigrante on their 8-year anniversary on December the 7th. Proyecto Emigrante is a nonprofit organization in Dallas and Fort Worth that since 2005 has served our community by providing low-cost and reliable immigration counseling. I admire the hard work and perseverance of its executive director, Douglas Interiano, and the entire staff and volunteers who work hard to help their clients navigate the immigration system to become permanent residents and citizens, and to also help them apply for deferred action. Proyecto also serves a very critical role in protecting a vulnerable immigrant community from fraud and abuse. These efforts take courage, conviction, and selflessness that, as the holiday season approaches, reminds us that we should serve others and look beyond ourselves. Respecting our immigrant community and working hard to enact comprehensive immigration reform should be an urgent national priority for the country. I look forward to continuing that fight, and I'm honored that our nation will have Proyecto Emigrante as an ally in that effort. Keep up the good work and good luck on the future years of service. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, constituents across South Carolina's 2nd Congressional District are hurting because of the President's failing government health care takeover. As millions of Americans continue to receive policy cancellations, it is increasingly clear that Obamacare is destroying jobs. Angela from Lexington writes, quote, "Obamacare has caused my son to lose his insurance that was provided through his employer. They said they could not afford the new requirements. My son finally got a job that provided medical insurance, and then the President takes it away. There's definitely something wrong here. The President has broken multiple promises to the American people. As premiums increase, insurance is lost, and patients lose access to doctors. We must work together to continue to replace Obamacare with positive plans, as long introduced by Congressman Dr. Tom Price. Small business owners, such as the late J.W. Hendricks, warned of big government abuses, denying young people opportunity to fulfill the American dream. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we'll never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism."
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the New Market Tax Credit Program, which is set to expire at the end of this year. This program has proven critical toward making successful investments in communities like my own in western New York. In the city of Buffalo, New Market investments have leveraged over $180 million for projects, including restoration of the historic electric tower and the development of the Innovation Center at the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus. Thanks to New Market Tax Credit leverage funding, construction is currently underway at Roswell Park Cancer Institute's new Clinical Science Center. Mr. Speaker, at a time when our economy is recovering from collapse, support for programs that yield economic development and job creation is more critical than ever. I've joined my colleagues in seeking a permanent extension of this program and encourage our other colleagues to join us in the same pursuit. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yield back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Indiana seek recognition?
Request 1 minute to revise and suspend.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about choices. For my constituents, Obamacare is about tough choices and about unfair choices. Barbara from Indianapolis recently logged onto my website to share her Obamacare story, which is about her choices. She's a single mom trying to give her daughter the gift of a college education in a tough economy. President Obama's holiday gift to her, however, was a $200 increase in her monthly premium. Barbara wrote that for a single mother trying to put her child through college, it's too much. Where do I cut? My daughter's education, medical coverage, place to live, food? For Barbara, the choices posed by the increased premium posed in Obamacare are tough and unfair, and too many of my constituents are being forced to make these same unfair choices. They shouldn't have to choose between paying for college or paying for health insurance. Mr. Speaker, our choice is clear. The law is not working. Barbara and her daughter deserve a better path forward. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the clock is ticking with just 8 legislative days left this year. But I believe there's still time to bring comprehensive immigration reform to this floor for a vote. There is an incredible group of people that are fasting on the National Mall as a plea to us to pass some form of comprehensive immigration. Today marks day 22 of their fast, but their faith and commitment to change keeps them going. These men and women are sacrificing their health, and you mean to tell me that we can't find the humanity and compassion to pass a comprehensive immigration bill, Speaker Boehner? Are you kidding me? This isn't who we are as a nation. Cesar Chavez, Mahatma Gandhi called fasting a fervent prayer, but we must do our part on behalf of the families who've been hurt by this delay of comprehensive immigration reform. I'm standing with these courageous people and immigrant families all across this nation in demanding a vote on an immigration bill. Let's stop this shameful delay and bring a bill to this floor for a vote by the end of the year. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at a time when Americans continue to see their health care options diminished by the President's disastrous health care law, it's critical that we work to return choice and freedom to the American people. That's why I introduced H.R. 3498, a common-sense bill that gives seniors the freedom to make their own health care decisions and opt out of Medicare. If folks like Warren Buffett or Ross Perot want to opt out of Medicare Part A because they don't want or need a government entitlement paying for their care, we should let them. This bill truly tells seniors if you like your current coverage, you can keep it without the risk of losing other benefits like Social Security. Seniors want, need, and deserve the right to choose a health care plan that fits their needs. I urge my colleagues to join my efforts in returning freedom and choice to American seniors. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Ohio seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard a lot about choices and constituents and what we should do. Well, let me say to you, Mr. Speaker, and to this nation, our nation is at a crossroads. The decisions we make today will affect the long-term economic stability of our nation. Congress must pass a budget that helps grow our nation and creates jobs. We must eliminate the sequester and invest in our future by funding federal research and education programs. For example, in my district, The Ohio State University, one of the nation's premier research institutions, has recently experienced a 7.2% decrease in federal funding because of the sequester and other budget cuts to federal research and development. If this downward trend continues, no question it will affect our nation's next generation of science and discovery and innovation while slowing jobs growth. Federal investment in research and education are put to use in places like world-class laboratories and clinical trials, energy innovation centers. We must sustain these investments. Our nation's economic security depends on it. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the American people are still most concerned about job opportunities and economic growth. They're concerned about their checkbooks and family budgets as the winter months and holiday season arrive. All too often, Washington, D.C. makes it harder on the economy and the American people, not easier. Layer upon layer of government mandates, regulations, and taxes suffocate our struggling economy and come down hard upon the hardworking American people. The House must remain committed to focusing on job creation, economic prosperity, and opportunities for all Americans to succeed. This week, the House will continue our efforts to put more Americans back to work by focusing on pro-jobs legislation that makes it easier for our small businesses to access resources they need to expand and add employees. We'll work to pass legislation that builds on hydropower in our country, creating good-paying jobs through continuing to develop our all-of-the-above national energy policy. Mr. Speaker, the American people want Congress to work together for the betterment of our entire nation. We must come together and support these bipartisan solutions that encourage economic growth, better-paying jobs, and lead to more economic prosperity for all. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Delaware seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to recognize the 1973 basketball team from Howard High School in Wilmington, Delaware. This year marks 40 years since Howard's sensational 73 team won Delaware's boys state championship with an undefeated season of 24-0. Howard's 73 team wasn't the biggest, but the Wildcats were disciplined and they played with a lot of heart. They were led by their brilliant guards David Rohn and Kenny Hinson and the irrepressible Mike Miller, who battled much taller players under the boards. Supported by a big family of coaches, teachers, classmates, and Howard alumni, the Wildcats became the first team in Delaware history to finish the season undefeated. There were several games when it looked like Howard might get knocked off, including a nail-biter against the much bigger Salesianum School in the state semifinal, but the Wildcats were always able to pull it out in the end. Today I want to recognize Howard High School's 1973 boys basketball team, honor them for their historic season, and thank them for the work they continue to do for youth in the state of Delaware. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
The House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, homeowners in my home state of Florida and across the country face significant flood insurance rate increases as a result of reforms made to address the solvency of the National Flood Insurance Program. To ensure that NFIP remains both affordable for homeowners and sustainable for taxpayers, I have introduced H.R. 3312, the Homeowners Flood Insurance Relief Act. The bill would cap a homeowner's premiums at the end of a 10-year phase-in to no more than the appraised value of the structure over the course of a 30-year mortgage. It would also allow homeowners to pay premiums on a more affordable monthly basis rather than an annual lump sum. These common sense changes will ensure that homeowners stay in the program and any increased premiums do not harm the already fragile housing market's recovery. Furthermore, they continue the intent of the NFIP, protecting homeowners from devastating floods while also ensuring the program is able to cover its costs. I look forward to working with my colleagues to move this legislation forward. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today as a member of the Safe Climate Caucus to highlight the 100th legislative day that my colleagues and I have come to the House floor and called for action on climate change. Since we started this effort, California has been rocked by devastating wildfires, the Midwest has been damaged by tornadoes, an early season blizzard has wiped out livestock in the Dakotas, and deadly floods have destroyed parts of Colorado. Extreme weather events caused by climate change continue to affect families and businesses across this country. These are not random occurrences, but constant reminders that climate change is real. We will continue to make our voices heard on the House floor until everyone comes to the table, effective action is taken, and future generations are protected. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I listen to the conversation this morning in the 1 minute that are given, I don't hear many of my friends across the aisle talking about Obamacare. When I'm back at home, I'm hearing from thousands of people who have lost their insurance, people who did the right thing, Americans who bought insurance to cover themselves and their families who have now lost their insurance. Americans who we asked to do the right thing, they did it. In Wisconsin, 95% of Wisconsinites were covered. Instead of working on the 5% that weren't covered, we've now abandoned our health care system, and it's broken for those Americans who tried to do the right thing. In my district, Denise needs a kidney transplant. She's lost her insurance, she's lost her doctor, she's going to the exchange looking for insurance, and the one option that she has doesn't provide coverage with her current doctor. This is life and death for so many Americans. I hope that my friends across the aisle will start to talk about Obamacare and how we fix it and make it work for the American people, because right now it's not working. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The prior speaker's prayers are about to be answered. Mr. Speaker, my state of Kentucky is a national model for how the Affordable Care Act can make our constituents' lives more secure and their businesses stronger. I'd like to share one story. Will Russell is the owner of Y Louisville, a small independent business in my district that specializes in locally designed clothing and art. The father of a 1-year-old, he also has a pre-existing condition that led insurance companies to deny him coverage for the past 15 years. Thanks to the Affordable Care Act, beginning January 1, Will and his wife and son will be covered under a plan they found on Connect, Kentucky's health insurance exchange. Will estimates his family will save $300 a month. Add that to the peace of mind that comes with knowing he'll never face medical bankruptcy and the threat of losing his thriving business just because he didn't have access to insurance. He's been so pleased with the ease and affordability of Connect that he's now exploring coverage for his employees for the first time through the state's small business exchange. Mr. Speaker, Will's story is one among millions of Americans who are finding expanded care through the Affordable Care Act. To quote Will, "It's going to be a new day for my family, for me, and so many people just like us in Kentucky and throughout the country." I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to talk about the millions of Americans who have lost their health insurance under Obamacare. The House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the federal government's chief watchdog, is holding a field hearing this Friday in Apache Junction, Arizona, entitled Obamacare Implementation, the Broken Promise. If you like your current plan, you can keep it. As a member of this committee, I'm joining the chairman, Darrell Issa, to listen to Arizonans tell their Obamacare nightmares. I want to know how this terrible law is hurting you personally, so we can show President Obama and the Senate Democrats the damage Obamacare is inflicting throughout Arizona and across the country. I encourage you all to come and let your voice be heard. Mr. Speaker, we are listening. If you are not able to attend but would like to share your story, please visit gop.gov/yourstory. Obamacare has always been fundamentally flawed. I will continue to do all I can to protect the American people from this horrific law. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Nevada seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and submit.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
With fewer than 7 legislative days left in the year, the window to address the staggering list of unfinished business before the House is rapidly closing. No farm bill, no long-term budget, no tax reform, no INDA, no comprehensive immigration package, no replacement for the sequester. In fact, the GOP has continuously failed to govern and create real solutions to the pressing issues facing this country. Over the past 11 months, Republicans have undermined the important economic progress that we've made, disproportionately harming low-income women and children and keeping 11 million undocumented immigrants in the shadows. They have gutted nutritional programs, voted to repeal health care reform 43 times, and shut down the government in a fit of pique, putting millions at economic risk. This holiday season, as Americans enjoy exchanging gifts with family and friends, I'm afraid all they're going to find from House Republicans is a lump of coal. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obamacare exemplifies perfectly the problem of bureaucratic hubris. Confident that Americans would come to see their mass-produced health care as better, the suits in Washington chose to pass a completely partisan law that, and regardless of promises, force unwanted insurance changes on millions of Americans. Many of my constituents object to the characterization of better. Coverage isn't better if it's not what a family wants or needs. It's not better if its shiny new mandates make health care unaffordable. Holly from Clemens knows this too well. She wrote to say, I'm a geriatric care manager. I pay $171 per month. My deductible is $2,500. I went on healthcare.gov and was informed I now will get no financial assistance to pay for my plan. If I choose the lowest cost plan, I'll be paying $330 per month. My doctor's not listed as a provider, and my drug deductible will be $2,500. I feel I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. Better for Holly would be a health care law that doesn't make her insurance preferences illegal. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
I extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the 100th consecutive legislative day the Safe Climate Caucus has spoken on the House floor calling for action to address climate change. The science itself is clear. Climate change is already contributing to significant environmental changes, unprecedented droughts, floods, and hurricanes, to name a few. But climate change is not only a serious environmental problem, it's a serious economic problem as well. American businesses, large and small, understand this threat, and they're responding accordingly. They're increasing their energy efficiencies, reducing pollution, and implementing more sustainable business practices. American businesses understand that the changing climate is already hurting their bottom lines, and they're taking action to strengthen their competitiveness and their resiliency. Congress should be doing the same, yet our majority continues to stick its head in the sand and do nothing. Climate change poses a real and immediate threat to our economy, and we really can't afford to wait any longer. I urge my colleagues to join with American businesses in taking action now to address this urgent problem. And I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and to advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to call attention to one number that has remained too high for too long, and that's the number of unemployed people in this country. Right now, that number stands at 11.3 million. That's 11.3 million of our fellow Americans. These are not just statistics. These are real people. They're our friends, our neighbors, our children, and they deserve better. They deserve policies that encourage real economic growth that will create jobs, not higher health care costs, policy cancellations, and threats of job loss brought on by Obamacare. This unworkable law is causing health care premiums to rise all across the country, particularly in my home state of North Carolina, and millions of Americans have had their insurance policies canceled. This is not a plan for growth. It's a plan for more strain on hard-working Americans. It's time for real solutions. It's time to get Americans back to work. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, by the end of December, 1.3 million unemployed Americans will lose their unemployment benefits because Congress refuses to act. It has been 1,066 days since I arrived in Congress, and the Republican leaders have still not allowed a single vote on serious legislation to address our unemployment crisis. As we approach the holidays, many families will grieve and worry. Many will suffer because January 2014, they will be the victims of the unemployment crisis. The sad fact is this: we have solutions, but the Republican leaders have abandoned these common sense solutions and will not bring them to the floor. Mr. Speaker, in this tight job market, It's not the unemployed who are lazy. It's this Congress that's lazy. Our mantra should be jobs, jobs, jobs.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about the Affordable Health Care Act. As the American people know, members of Congress now are covered by this law, and rightly so. We should engage in the D.C. exchange. I want to tell you about my personal experience with the D.C. exchange. The President said you can keep your health care plan, that your premiums will go down. Mr. Speaker, I lost my health care plan. I have 5 kids, and my premiums have gone up significantly. And I don't know if I can keep all the same doctors that I had to treat my kids. You know, if this is such a great law, why isn't the President of the United States covered by this law? Why didn't the President of the United States on day 1 have a Rose Garden ceremony as customer number 1 under his law, Obamacare, and sign up for this law? Well, you know what? The answer is he hasn't signed up for it because maybe he doesn't think it's good enough for his family, but yet it's good enough for the American people. That's the height of hypocrisy and arrogance in Washington, and it needs to stop. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in support of H.R. 3546, the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Extension Act of 2013. Without congressional action, the federal Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program will expire just days after Christmas. If this happens, 1.3 million Americans, including 1,300 granted staters, will be cut off from their benefits on December 28th. We cannot let that happen. These benefits provide a vital lifeline to granted staters and Americans all across this country who are struggling to find work. With only 8 legislative days remaining before the end of 2013, the time is now to extend this critical program. This bill would extend unemployment insurance through the end of 2014, giving hardworking people in New Hampshire the boost they need to find work. I recently held a career and opportunities fair where I saw over 300 people striving for a better job and a brighter future. Let's give them that chance. Please pass this legislation. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Republicans have a plan to provide real solutions that will help Americans, all Americans, in a very tough economy. We want to spur economic growth, create more jobs, and provide fairness for everyone. But what do the President and his Democrat allies have to offer 11 million Americans who are out of work today? They offer up Obamacare. This deeply flawed law is forcing hardworking Americans to shell out more of their hard-earned money for higher insurance costs. It's causing millions of Americans to lose their insurance coverage altogether. Too many Americans are already struggling to make ends meet. It's not fair that they're being forced to deal with the Obamacare train wreck, too. It's time for real solutions. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, when Jerry Spencer told his family he was gay, his mother told him not to worry about it, that they would fix it. This began 7 years of going through so-called conversion therapy to try to make him straight. He was forced to put blocks of ice on his hands while he looked at pictures of guys holding hands and would only be given relief from the pain if he pleaded to see a picture of a man and woman holding hands. Other survivors of this quackery were told to strip down and hold their genitalias or to snap themselves with rubber bands each time they experienced same-sex attraction. Jerry said that after each therapy session, he was a little more destroyed. These attempts to change LGBT youth are extremely harmful and can cause depression, substance abuse, anxiety, self-destructive behavior, and even suicide. These practices have been rejected by every mainstream mental health association as neither safe nor effective. These efforts frequently increase family rejection, which we know make LGBT youth 8 times more likely to report attempting suicide, 5 times more likely to report high levels of depression, and 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs. Recognizing these harms, California and New Jersey have passed laws to protect minors. State legislatures in Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New York, and Ohio are considering similar measures. And this week I will introduce the Stop Harming Our Kids resolution to encourage other states to pass laws to protect LGBT minors from these harmful, damaging practices. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Are there any further one-minute requests? Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas or nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1095 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1095, a bill to amend Title 49 United States Code to direct the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, Transportation Security Administration to transfer unclaimed money recovered at airport security checkpoints to nonprofit organizations that provide places of rest and recuperation at airports for members of the armed forces and their families and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, and the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. And I stand in strong support of this bill, the TSA Loose Change Act, co-sponsored by my good friend and chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Congressman Jeff Miller, with 42 bipartisan co-sponsors. The Committee on Homeland Security ordered this legislation reported during the 112th Congress and again this Congress. This is the first time it's being considered by the full House. I'm pleased to be here today to express my strong support for the measure and urge its adoption. Mr. Speaker, in the hustle and bustle of our nation's airports, with millions of people traveling every day, it's no surprise that some travelers will inadvertently leave behind loose change at TSA screening checkpoints. That pocket change may not add up to much at one airport, but when you total it up across 450 airports, it accounts to about $500,000 every year. TSA is currently authorized to keep the money for its own use, but the agency's been slow to spend it and already receives $7 billion towards its operations every year. I believe this bill is a unique opportunity to put that loose change to better use by spending it on airport centers that provide our military heroes with a more relaxing and comfortable experience when they travel. What better time to make this change than during this busy holiday season when service members are traveling to spend time with their loved ones. According to the CBO, this bill will not have a significant net impact on the budget in any given year, given the modest amount of money involved. And supporting our military service members and their families is a goal that we can all get behind. This bill represents a common sense step towards that objective. Earlier this year, we passed the Helping Heroes Fly Act, sponsored by Congresswoman from Hawaii, Ms. Gabari. That bill is already making a difference for wounded warriors traveling through our airports, and H.R. 1095 is another chance, another example to further our commitment to our U.S. soldiers. I commend Chairman Miller for sponsoring this legislation, as well as my colleagues on the committee and across the aisle for their support. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to ask Mr. Richmond to manage the bill H.R. 1095.
Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1095, the TSA Loose Change Act, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
H.R. 1095 is a straightforward bill with an admirable goal. That is to take unclaimed money left behind at passenger screening checkpoints, often in the form of loose change, and put it to good use, aiding our service members and their families as they travel. Under current law, unclaimed money left at passenger screening checkpoints is used to offset civil aviation security costs. In recent years, TSA has collected slightly less than $500,000 annually in unclaimed money at checkpoints. H.R. 1095 would amend current law by directing that these funds be transferred to a nonprofit organization such as the United Service Organizations that provide places of relaxation and recuperation at airports for members of the armed forces and their families. I am pleased to lend my support for this legislation. I know that the chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee has been a champion of this legislation for several Congresses now, and I applaud him for his persistence on this issue. Chairman Miller will be glad to know that this is not the first bill regarding service members and veterans that the committee has seen moving on during this Congress. Earlier this year, the Helping Heroes Fly Act, which I was an original co-sponsor, went on to become law. That legislation, introduced by my colleague on the Committee on Homeland Security, Representative Gabbard from Hawaii, requires TSA to provide expedited screening for severely injured service members and veterans. Together, the Helping Heroes Fly Act and the TSA Loose Change Act displayed the committee's commitment to honoring our service members and veterans. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as you may consume to the sponsor of the legislation, the distinguished gentleman from Florida and chairman of the Committee on Veterans Affairs, Mr. Miller.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I first want to thank the chairman, my good friend, Mr. McCall, the ranking member, Mr. Thompson, also Chairman Hudson and Congressman Rogers of Alabama, and really all the members of the Homeland Security Committee for their support of this important piece of legislation. As a proud supporter, as many of us in this chamber are, of our military, I'm grateful that each of my colleagues and their hardworking staff for the opportunity to help advance H.R. 1095, the TSA Loose Change Act that's on the floor with us today. This act is a common-sense piece of legislation with bipartisan support, has no impact on the federal budget, and supports our men and women in uniform who dedicate their lives in defense of the freedom that we enjoy. As a result of this bill's passage, travelers' unclaimed change left at airport security checkpoints, which is currently retained by the Department of Homeland Security, would be put to good use right there in airports across America. Now, what may seem like a small amount of change left behind to some, nickels, dimes, quarters, pennies, actually amounts to hundreds of thousands of dollars each year and can make a significant difference if used wisely. By directing TSA to transfer unclaimed money to nonprofit organizations that provide a rest and recuperation area in our nation's airports, H.R. 1095 would ensure that thousands of coins, when bundled together, will be used in support of millions of our nation's warriors. I want to urge all of my colleagues to support H.R. 1095, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance.
Yields back. The gentleman from Texas continue to reserve?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have any more speakers on this bill, so if you don't, Mr. Chairman, I'm prepared to close, or...
I have one additional speaker.
I'll continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Louisiana reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield as much time as you may consume to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina and chairman of the Subcommittee on Transportation Security, Mr. Hudson.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to voice my strong support for the TSA Loose Change Act, authored by my good friend Jeff Miller of Florida. We see loose change at security lines in every airport from Charlotte down to Pensacola and all across this nation. It may not seem like much, but as people quickly shuffle through their checkpoints and leave change behind, but it adds up to almost $500,000 a year. Under current law, the money is used for civil aviation security, but this bill will allow TSA to use this loose change to direct it to a good cause. Mr. Speaker, I agree with Mr. Miller. This money should be put to the use of supporting our military members and their families by providing them a place to rest at the airports. I would like to thank Chairman Miller for his tireless effort, his work on this issue. Also, other members of the Homeland Security Committee. Particularly want to recognize the ranking member on our subcommittee, Mr. Richmond, who has dedicated himself to this work, who's worked with me on this and many other issues in a bipartisan way. And, Mr. Speaker, that's what the American people are looking for. They're looking for us to come here and work together for solutions for the American people. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the work we've produced with this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman from North Carolina yields back. Does the gentleman from Texas continue to reserve?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and let me thank the chairman of the full Committee on Homeland Security, the ranking member on, well, the chairman of the committee that I am ranking member on, and Mr. Miller for introducing this legislation and working in such a bipartisan manner, and of course my ranking member, Mr. Thompson, from the neighboring state, Mississippi. This bill is a bipartisan effort, and it goes to show to the American people that we do have good common sense here in Congress, and we do things that's right just because it's the right thing to do. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would just urge all my colleagues to support this legislation that will give resources to some of our most valuable citizens in the country, the ones who put their lives on the line for us, that we may help them and expedite and make more relaxed their travel through the United States. And with that, I would just urge my colleagues to support it and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also want to thank Chairman Hudson, Chairman Miller, Chairman Richmond, Ranking Member Richmond, and Ranking Member Thompson. I'm proud of the work we've done on this committee in the sense that at a time of intense partisanship and acrimony, that we have conducted ourselves very professionally in a bipartisan way. And I think when it comes to the national security issues, that's precisely what we should be doing. And it's what the American people, as Chairman Hudson said, expect and deserve. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge the adoption of this bipartisan common sense bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1095 as amended? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Hey, thanks, Jeff.
Does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2719 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 196, H.R. 2719, a bill to require the Transportation Security Administration to implement best practices and improve transparency with regard to technology acquisition programs and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, and the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, will each control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this bill, the Transportation Security Acquisition Reform Act, which was developed and introduced by the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, the chairman of the Transportation Security Subcommittee, Mr. Hudson. And over the course of several years, the Committee on Homeland Security has conducted extensive oversight of TSA technology acquisition programs. During this session, the Subcommittee on Transportation Security has continued this critical oversight function and taken it to the next level under Chairman Hudson's leadership. Poor planning, excessive costs, a clumsy test and evaluation process, and other flaws have had a crippling effect on passenger travel and our security effectiveness. H.R. 2719 is common sense, bipartisan, and an important step towards addressing the very deficiencies that left travelers without adequate privacy protections. For instance, $200 million worth of screening equipment sitting in warehouses and hundreds of machines abruptly pulled out of airports before the end of their life cycles. H.R. 2719 requires TSA to develop a multi-year technology investment plan to serve as a roadmap for industry and shed new light on TSA spending decisions. It gives Congress early warning when technology programs exceed their intended costs, are unduly delayed, or do not provide security results initially promised. It also requires TSA to get a handle on its broken inventory management process. Mr. Speaker, recommendations from across government and industry were incorporated into this crucial piece of legislation, and numerous industry stakeholders have expressed their support for this bill. I especially appreciate the hard work of my colleagues on the committee, especially Mr. Hudson from North Carolina and Mr. Richmond from Louisiana, for their bipartisan approach they took in crafting this important piece of legislation and their collaborative, deliberative process that they followed to bring this bill to the floor in their first year as chair and ranking member of this subcommittee. I urge my colleagues to join us in passing this vital piece of legislation that will further protect our transportation systems and the American taxpayer. Let's send this bill to the Senate and on to the President for his signature. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of H.R. 2719, the Transportation Security Acquisition Reform Act, and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 2719 addresses long-standing concerns that I and other members of this committee have raised about the Transportation Security Administration's stewardship of taxpayer funds when pursuing, acquiring, and deploying security-related technologies. Importantly, the bill also seeks to address TSA's lackluster record of contracting with small businesses. Earlier this year, the Subcommittee on Transportation Security, of which I am the ranking member, held a hearing with industry stakeholders where we heard from representatives of both small and large businesses on how to improve TSA's acquisition practices and how the agency can engage with small businesses more effectively. Simply put, TSA's failure to meet its goals for prime contracting with small businesses is unacceptable. There are ample small, minority-owned, and disadvantaged businesses that are ready, willing, and able to provide services and technologies to TSA that would enhance our security and likely reduce contracting costs. If TSA cannot identify such businesses, I will be happy to refer them to some. The bill takes a significant step toward holding TSA more accountable for achieving its goals for contracting with small and disadvantaged businesses by requiring the agency to develop an action plan to accomplish its goals and report to Congress on how it plans to get there. I thank Subcommittee Chairman, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for his willingness to include small businesses in the discussion as we develop the legislation before the House today. Indeed, at every turn, this legislation was developed in a bipartisan fashion, and the final product is better for that. The bill tackles head-on the lack of transparency and accountability that has plagued TSA's acquisition practices since the agency's inception. Among TSA's most notable and costly acquisition missteps, I would put the puffer machines that did not work and the whole-body AIT machines that could not be modified to protect passengers' privacy. While no legislation can guarantee that an agency will not falter when acquiring technologies, H.R. 2719 represents a significant step in the right direction. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield such time as you may consume to the distinguished gentleman from North Carolina, the sponsor of this legislation and chairman of the Subcommittee on Transportation Security, Mr. Hudson.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to support a critical piece of legislation, the Transportation Security Acquisition Reform Act, which I introduced in July and am working on for many months. I thank Chairman McCall for helping move this bill through our committee and commend all the members of the committee on a swift and unanimous vote to bring this bill to the floor. Again, this was a unanimous vote both in the subcommittee and the full committee. This bill has the bipartisan support of our chairman and ranking member on the full committee, as well as myself and the ranking member on the Transportation Security Subcommittee. And let me say, this bill would not be possible if Mr. Thompson and Mr. Richmond were not willing to work with me on this, and frankly, their collaboration made this better legislation. And as I've said before, the American people expect us to come here and work together for solutions, and this is a prime example of that. This bill has withstood the careful scrutiny of our committee's oversight and has also been endorsed by numerous stakeholders outside the Capitol. I ask unanimous consent to have their letters of support entered into the record.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, in today's partisan culture of a divided Congress, I'm very proud to report that we can come together across the aisle to address a very real issue we have at Transportation Security Administration, that's acquisition and procurement. For over 10 years, we've all witnessed hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on failed technologies and machines sitting idle in warehouses. Poor planning, inventory management, and limited communication with stakeholders have decreased security, limited innovation, and squandered taxpayer dollars. I recognize that TSA is constantly trying to respond to new threats. They have a difficult job. But in some cases, the pressure to perform and deploy new technologies can lead to a reactive approach without sufficient planning. They still have a long way to go. Having a long-term plan that leverages experts within government and within industry can help prevent this capability gaps. Our bill provides that roadmap to success. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to let TSA drag its feet on establishing greater transparency and accountability for technologies that protect our nation's traveling public. It is incumbent upon us to make sure taxpayer dollars are being used effectively and efficiently. We must take action. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields back. Does the gentleman from Texas continue to reserve?
I do, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would take this opportunity to thank the Chairman of Homeland Security, Mr. McCall, and the Chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Hudson, for the bipartisan manner in which they handle not only this bill but all of the bills. And it's typical of how we conduct ourselves on the committee, especially my ranking member, Mr. Thompson from Mississippi, that we put the goals, the safety, and the value of the American public over partisanship. And what this bill does, it does four things that I'm really excited about. One, it creates jobs through working with small businesses. It provides greater transparencies with the acquisition process. It creates more efficiencies within the department and saves the American taxpayers money. And last but certainly not least, it makes our traveling public safer. And with those goals that we made a priority in crafting this legislation and pushing it through, I am happy with the final product, and I would urge all of our members to support it. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to associate myself with the gentleman from Louisiana's remarks. I do think this is it's a very important bill that will save money ultimately, taxpayer dollars, make the system more efficient, while at the same time better protecting the traveling public, which I think that's what it's all about. And so with that, I urge adoption of this bill to provide these necessary reforms to TSA acquisition, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill, H.R. 2719, as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Mr. Speaker, on that vote, I'd request a recorded vote.
So the gentleman asked for the yeas and nays. Is that correct?
Yes.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8, Rule 20. Further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1204 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 199, H.R. 1204, a bill to amend Title 49 United States Code to direct the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, Transportation Security Administration to establish an Aviation Security Advisory Committee and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall, and the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, will each control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks, include any extraneous material on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this bill, the Aviation Security Stakeholder Participation Act of 2013, sponsored by the ranking member of the full committee on Homeland Security, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Speaker, the American people know that the TSA is charged with protecting our aviation systems against another horrific terrorist attack like we experienced on September the 11th, 2001. However, the role of industry stakeholders, from pilots and flight attendants to private screening companies and airport operators, is equally as critical, albeit less visible. TSA is in the spotlight, for better or for worse, but many of TSA's private sector partners are also responsible for implementing effective security programs and keeping travelers safe. This shared responsibility is precisely why TSA cannot make decisions in a vacuum, as has been known to do. The bill before us sends a necessary message to TSA leadership and, frankly, to all DHS leadership that the Congress values stakeholders' input, private sector collaboration, and thoughtful planning prior to rolling out new policies and procedures that affect millions of travelers. The Aviation Security Advisory Committee that is authorized in this legislation serves as a valuable sounding board for TSA decision makers. By codifying the committee in statute, we will prevent a needless expiration of its charter and disbandment, which has already happened once under TSA. As chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security, I am proud of the manner in which this bill was thoughtfully considered and amended in committee by members on both sides of the aisle, and I thank the ranking member for his work on this important issue. And I think the more recent example we have with the knives being allowed on the airplanes without input and participation by the flight attendants and the pilots is a classic example of this department not talking to the private sector about what can better protect them and passengers on airplanes. And of course, that decision was reversed by the director of TSA eventually after he consulted with the stakeholders in the community. This bill will provide that they consult with those stakeholders before such decisions are made. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 1204, the Aviation Security Stakeholder Participation Act, and I yield myself as much time as I